Hello and welcome to the LifeWorks podcast. Joining me today is Chris Jones. Chris is the lead pastor at Hope Community Church in Hedgesville, West Virginia. He is also a prolific entrepreneur. So we have some really interesting things to talk about today. Chris, it's great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
It's good to be here, Mark.
So I want to jump right in. Today, we're going to be talking about purpose and calling. And just by way of definition, are they the same thing?
Yeah, I think it might be a semantics thing at the end of the day. Calling is something that maybe, I'm a pastor full time and have been for the last almost 22 years. And so calling might be a term that we use more in the church or in a religious environment where you use the term calling. Purpose might be something that you might use outside of the church, but I think they could be intertwined. Both of them are pointing to something beyond ourselves that may be directing our lives, directing our steps. So if you say, this is my purpose in life, you probably didn't come up with that when you were 6 years old or 14 years old. You probably found yourself going in a certain direction and then seeing that direction manifest itself in your life in such a way that it lined up with your gift sets and abilities and all those things. And so in the church world, we would use that term calling and go ahead and acknowledge that God is behind that wiring and the way you're set up and all those things. So I think those terms could be interchangeable depending on which crowd you're in.
How does a person know if they are on purpose or if they are fulfilling their purpose?
I think that looks different in maybe different seasons. The way our culture is starting to define whether you're doing something that brings meaning to life is changing. And people want to do stuff that's fun and not hard and enjoyable. And they want to make sure they got 5 weeks vacation and family time and all these things. I'm finding that when I'm fulfilling the call or purpose in my life, sometimes all that stuff doesn't line up. And so you've seen a shift in American culture, I'd say over the last 50, 60 years, from this idea of put your head down to the grindstone, make it happen, go for it. You've seen a bit of a shift to find out what makes you feel good. And I'm not saying my purpose and calling never make me feel good, but it might not be the primary objective of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because inevitably there are seasons in your life where your calling doesn't feel good. Like it is work, it is hard, it is not comfortable. There's no part of it that's comfortable. So I want to start out at the outset saying that because I have bumped into people over the years that I can look at and tell that they're like, this is what you should be doing, but it's a difficult season in their life and it's hard to convince them of it. It's hard for them to settle into it because it's stressful or it doesn't feel good or it takes a lot of work. And it does matter how culture defines that. So if we're going into a season, like I have kids in their 20s who graduated from college and are starting their career, and I'm trying to instill in them, there's parts of your career that aren't going to be comfortable. There's parts of your career that aren't just going to come easy, that it's going to take work. It's going to take a lot of effort, but that effort is worth it. And I don't know if our culture is moving more towards that or a little bit more away from it. And I think that's an important thing to define up front, that your calling ends up looking like a whole bunch of things in different seasons, not to just drill down. This is what it looks like because I've had toddlers. I've been married early, had toddlers, had teenagers. Now I've got grown adult kids, and I've done a whole bunch of different things in between there. And so it manifests itself in a different way in different seasons.
So as both a minister and an entrepreneur, which do you consider your calling or your purpose? Because you have both going on.
You separated those things. I would say that I generalize it more than that. So I would say that I have grown into the role of a leader and into the role of a communicator. So that manifests itself in several different areas. So I'm leading people at the church. I'm leading a staff at the church of maybe 12 or 15 people. We had over 1,000 people at Easter. We're averaging around 600 people a weekend. So I'm leading in that capacity. Another role for me at the church is communicating weekly. Daily, actually. So there's an expectational level of communication I'm going to give every Sunday. There's an expectation through the week of how I'm going to communicate. So those are two things I got to be really good at. Outside of that, in a business that we own. I'm doing the same thing. I'm leading a business with about 15, 16 employees, and I'm communicating, here's the direction we're going to go. Here's the culture we're going to have. So while it doesn't have anything to do with the church, it's still the same role. I'm still using my same gift sets and those type of things. So if I was young and starting to do it all over again, I think I would try to generalize it more, and it would make it easier for me to flesh it out in several different capacities. Because if I limited myself as a pastor, then there's a whole lot of things I wouldn't have my hands in. There's a whole lot of other people I wouldn't be interacting with. And if I limited myself as just a business owner, it would go the same way. So trying to narrow down your skill sets into a couple things like that. Hey, I'm really good at these things. Now, how can I get these things to play out in life? And I'm not going to limit myself in that. And so I just tend to see, hey, how many opportunities can I take to lead? How many opportunities can I take to communicate? And so in reality, it ends up getting me all kinds of things that I didn't expect.
So what you do, or the way that you see your purpose or your calling, is really more generalized. It's not so much a function of your function or the role that you're playing, whether you're a minister or an entrepreneur. It's not like being an entrepreneur or being a minister or pastor is not your calling necessarily. It is how it plays out. But what you consider your purpose or calling is to be a leader and communicator. So you generalized it even more at a higher level, but how they play out is in those ways.
Yeah. So when I first was in the ministerial world, I was a youth pastor, and I was young. I was 24 years old, did it for 10 years at the same church I'm at now. And if you'd asked the 24-year-old version of me, I would have told you I'm a youth pastor. That's what I do. I'm a youth minister. And I could see myself doing this for a long time, and I would define it that way. The issue is, I think there's typically more in people than they ever mine. If you look at your life as some sort of a diamond mine or a gold mine, or whatever mine, I think most people make the mistake of going, this is who I am. And so they just scratch the surface of that mine. They start digging a little bit, and they find a job, and the job pays enough, and they just dig a little bit. Maybe they're seeing some success in that. But because they got so specific in it, they didn't look out. They didn't dig any deeper. They didn't dig to the left or the right, or they didn't go down another 10 feet. And so it doesn't materialize in a way that maybe could have happened. There's more capacity in you. So it's like digging 6 inches down and go, we found all the diamonds. We found 2 and that was it. Or we found 2 pieces of gold and that was it. When if you'd have dug 10 foot farther down, it would have been exponentially more that you would have found. So because historically we've reduced calling to a specific thing, if you find that thing on the surface, you stop digging. I'm called to be a doctor, or my purpose in life is to be a doctor. Okay, that's great. But could you be a doctor teacher? Could you be a doctor missionary? Could you be a doctor entrepreneur? Could you be a doctor anything else? And so my thing to people is keep digging, especially if you're young, keep digging. Don't settle for I'm a teacher, or I'm a mechanic, or I'm a welder. Don't settle for just that. Keep digging down, find the richness of what you're really good at. And so what people typically find out is, oh, I'm not just a welder, I'm a creative. And so if I limit myself to just a welder, I might just go into a job that doesn't capitalize on all my gift sets. But if I realize, hey, wait a second, I'm a creative type that happens to be really good at welding. Now I'm not just doing a day job, I'm creating sculpture, I'm innovating, I'm doing all those things. So really trying to get people to understand that, look, your calling is probably a little more broad than what we've been talking about. I know you went to college for X, and I know you want a job doing Y, but why don't you open up the rest of the alphabet and see there's wiggle room in all this stuff? And what I found is, if I just keep digging a little bit, if I just keep digging under the surface, next year I'm a pastor, a business owner, and also do pastoral training seminars in Africa. 20 years ago, you would have never heard me say anything like that. But I dug a little bit deeper, and now my life is so much richer because I didn't just go, well, I'm a youth pastor. That's it.
So with the potential of having so much, so if you generalize in the way that you're describing, and you dig deeper and you open yourself up to other opportunities, you may actually have more opportunities coming your way. My question is, how do you prioritize between all of those opportunities that might come your way? Because for you, it can be very different, right? One is a ministerial path, another is an entrepreneurial path. And mind you, I can completely relate with you in terms of having multiple hats and multiple roles. So how do you determine which way I should be going at this time versus maybe I need to put that on the shelf for later?
Yeah. I would say that, first of all, there's no clear-cut formula for that. It genuinely is a case by case. What I find is that if you're applying a strict, rigid formula to your life, you're going to miss some stuff, because some stuff is going to come at a time where you're not prepared. Some stuff is going to come at a time when you don't think you can do it. That's just the way life hits you. Life doesn't have a syllabus. Life doesn't have a Google Calendar that's already prepared for you and says, hey, on the third week of next month, you need to be ready because you're going to get this opportunity to do this thing you never dreamed you could do. So I tend to look at it as, are these things in my core skill sets? So that requires me to know a little bit about myself. That requires me to be able to be analytical about myself. What am I good at? What am I not good at? And there's a whole ton of personality tests to give you a snapshot of where you're at in the moment. The latest one that I've taken is Patrick Lencioni's The Genius Assessment, which confirmed to me over the last 25 years of doing this that I'm working in my geniuses. Like I'm a galvanizer, and I have discernment. These two geniuses of I can get a whole bunch of people together to do something, and I can see the big picture of how we're going to get there. Now I'm assessing the opportunities that come to me in light of those things. Is this going to create a massive amount of frustration in my life because somebody wants me to be detail oriented? I'm not doing it. Do not ask me to do the accounting work. Do not ask me to do all the follow-up. It's not going to, I'm going to be an abject failure at it. So that's going to filter out a whole bunch of things. Then I'm going to look at, okay, is this opportunity to communicate to a group of people about an issue that I'm passionate about? Is it going to be leading a group of people in something I'm passionate about? But those are the cases, well, that's in my wheelhouse. That's what I know that about me. I've had that affirmed by other people. So it's not an issue of me being arrogant and saying I can do all these things. It's I've done the assessments. I've had other people in my life over the years, mentors say, this is your core, this is what you're good at. Take these opportunities. And so that starts to bring a clarification to it. I don't know if there's a formula, but it's the idea of, I'm not super rigid about it, but saying, okay, I have this much time and everybody gets the same amount. And so I'm going to take advantage of the things that I'm good at, that are in my wheelhouse. That means you have to know yourself. That means you have to have that information from somebody else. And then when I figure all that out, it's easy for me to pluck those things in. It's easy for me to go, yep, that's going to work. And no, that's not going to work. Every now and then I get the wires crossed and I try to do something I'm not good at, and everybody suffers for it, which I'm in one of those circumstances right now. I'd apologize. Everybody knows. And I just said, hey, I'm an abject failure when it comes to this.
That happens in conversations with my wife a lot, actually. She's not shy about, correcting me. And
you're
saying,
out of your wheelhouse right now.
Mark, you are way out of your wheelhouse on this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely relate with that. I want to go back to something that you said earlier. You talked about being in a mine. And I really like the analogy. Tell me a little bit more about digging deeper, or digging more to the right or to the left, or digging differently. How does a person do that? Or what does that look like to a person?
One of the things, if you're young listening to this, one of the things you have to realize is you don't know enough about yourself to know what you're good at yet. And when you and I've talked about our first college experiences, which weren't exceptional, mine was definitely not exceptional. And so I remember being in college at 18, 19 years old and having a speech class and dropping the class the day before I was supposed to give the speech because I was terrified. I thought, there's no part of my life that wants to do this. It's just ridiculous. Why would I ever stand up in front of 20 people and give a speech? And now I'll go to another country where I don't even speak the language through an interpreter and speak to 1,000 people. Under a tin roof, not even really get that nervous about it. So how do you get from that point to that point? And one of the things is just opening yourself up to new experiences. So I was 18, 19 years old, had written it off. And then at about 21 years old, I got an opportunity in the church that I now pastor. I was volunteering with the youth pastor. I wasn't on staff yet. And he said, "Hey, would you like to preach? Would you like to speak to the kids on a Thursday night?" And my mindset had shifted to, this is an opportunity being given to me. I should probably take it and at least figure out if it's something, because I'm 21 years old. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And so I took it, and then I got good feedback, which anybody listening to this knows, speaking to teenagers is the most terrifying thing you could probably do. I took it. I got good feedback. The guy that was youth pastor at the time gave me good feedback. He's about 10 years older than me. And I thought, hey, wait a second. This is something that now feels like I could be good at. And so I just kept digging a little deeper in that, I started watching people give speeches that I thought were great and reading books about it. And so I just started digging more. So wherever you find yourself, find something that intrigues you, find something that kind of makes your heart flutter a little bit. It could make you nervous. It could scare you. It could do all those things, but find something that, hey, I keep coming back to this, no matter how much it scares me, no matter how much work it is, I keep coming back to this. And then just get a big shovel out and start digging. Just get a big shovel out. Don't settle for the job. Don't go into the first job and go, well, go back to the welding thing. Well, I'm a welder and I'm just going to be in this job for the rest of my life. No, dig all around the welding thing in every aspect of it. Just keep digging and then find out. So my thing, I all of a sudden found out in every circumstance that I got into, I was stepping towards the front. Hey, maybe we should do it this way. Did anybody think about this? Or people started asking me, could you lead this thing? And then all of a sudden, I found people coming around me and I would go, I think we should do this and this. And then 5 days later, it would happen. And I would be thinking, oh, okay, I was leading those people. I didn't have any formal education on how to do it. I had some mentors, but it was just coming naturally. So I started digging and getting better at it. And then I found out I could lead them in this context and I could lead them in another context. And the overall arching theme of it was that I was pretty competent at leading people in a lot of different scenarios. And so I would tell a person who's trying to figure that out, that figure out what that overarching theme is. Is it a communicator? Is it a creative? Is it leading? Is it my wife is extremely detail oriented. And so that theme shows up in her life over and over, whether it's in the accounting world that she's in, or it's with our business where she's looking over my shoulder, making sure I'm not overlooking something. I need those people in my life. And so she's extremely good at that. So that's an overarching theme of her life. That's her calling, is to be detail oriented in a whole bunch of different environments. And then you start digging and you find out how that fleshes out.
What does a person look like who's living their calling or they're living their purpose?
Busy. I know in our modern day, everybody hates the word busy. Now, we all like to use it, but we're all trying to get away from it. If you flip through Instagram, it's all about how to retire at 40 and go lay on the beach. I know this is going to be unpopular, but that's not your calling. Laying around on the beach for another 40 years is not a calling. To me, that's miserable. That would be awful. If you are fulfilling your calling, in my case, I would say the calling of God in your life, what he's set out for you to do. If you're fulfilling that, your life is going to be full to the max. I'm not saying you're not taking vacations. I'm not saying there's not downtime, but it's going to be full because it's a life well lived. And the people that we look up to in life, the people that we build statues of, the people that we quote, have full lives. They're not laying around all day. They're not on social media nonstop to the point they can't get anything done. They live full lives. They're taking advantage of opportunities. And so I would say, number one, it's going to be full. It's going to be full of a whole lot of things that scare you. It's going to be full of a whole lot of things that bring you the same amount of joy and the same amount of anxiety. And when you look back on 10 years and go, man, this thing's flown by and I've enjoyed a lot of it. And a lot of it's freaked me out. And a lot of it's, you could say, oh, yeah, that probably looks like calling. That probably looks like purpose. And when you read back through history, whether you read the founding fathers, or you read Apple or Tesla, or you read any of the big people now, Amazon, there's a whole lot of moments in those guys' lives that were very fulfilling and very scary, but they just kept digging. And now we're either writing stories about them or using their products. And so if your life looks like that, where it's full and you are as equally fulfilled as you are scared, you're probably somewhere right in the middle of calling.
That's very encouraging, actually, and validating, I think.
Yeah. With a little shake of failure in there that we've talked about before.
It's true. Yeah. Us experts.
Yeah.
If you were to survey 100 people, so you lead
Mm.
a church of about 600, take 100 of them. How
Mhm.
many of them do you think are living their purpose, or they're living what, as you would put it, what God has called them to do?
I've never done that. I would like to say, as the pastor of Hope Community Church, 100%. I don't know. That's probably not realistic. My goal as a pastor is very simple. It's to move people closer to God. So if people are moving closer to God, then my expectation is those things would start showing up. I have that bent towards it. So in Ephesians, Paul, the Apostle Paul, is writing to the church in Ephesus, and he says that we are God's workmanship, that we were put together a certain way on purpose. Mark, you think the way you do by default. It's not 100% pure, because we've got some input from some things throughout our life, but a majority of your natural bent towards things is God created. So he created us on purpose, a certain way. And then Paul says to do good things, to do good works, to produce things, to fulfill that calling. And it says which he prepared in advance for us to do. I'm not the fatalist that believes in that we're predestined to the point where we just wake up and see how it goes and we have no input in this thing. But I believe that God inherently knows everything that we're capable of. So he knows what our capacity is. He knows how far we have to dig to mine that richness of life. He knows all those things. So he puts all those opportunities in front of us because he knows before that we're capable. Does that make sense? And so what we try to do in the church is get people to the mindset, the closer you move to God and the deeper you dig, the more of that richness comes out of your life, the more fulfillment comes out of your life. Because God, in his goodness to us, knows our capacity, knows what we're capable of. So he puts all these opportunities in front of us to take advantage of that and to enrich other people's lives. It's not just for me to buy a bigger house or a better car. No, it's to enrich other people. So all of a sudden, when you are doing your calling, when you're fulfilling your purpose, it enriches all the people's lives around you. Your family's better off for it. Your friends are better off for it. Or your business is better off for it. So as a pastor, if I can take those 100 people that you're talking about and I can move them in that direction, then that number goes up exponentially because everybody around them starts to benefit from it. That's a long answer to I have no idea what that number is.
So we have several listener questions that have come in light of our topic around purpose and calling. What do you do when you feel like you are living outside of your purpose?
You're probably in a circumstance where you can't quit what you're currently doing. I get that. There are a lot of people who are probably listening to this today in jobs they hate, that is difficult for them. It's nerve-wracking. It's not in their wheelhouse, but it's paying the bills right now. I would say this. Let's go back to the mining thing. What happens when we get in circumstances like that, especially if we've been in them for a long time? We tend to put all our mining tools away. And we tend to say, I got a pension here. I've got a retirement. I've been here 15 years. There's no chance. I'm just stuck. And we use that terminology a lot. We're just stuck. But it's paying the bills. So we never really sit down and make a list of pros and cons about this. So what are the pros about staying in a job that you hate or is not your calling or purpose? The pros are it's paying the bills. The pros are I get a retirement. The pros are I get 3 weeks vacation or 5 weeks vacation. The pros are I get family sick leave. The pros are it's decent insurance. We hardly ever sit down and really do a apples to apples comparison with the downside. The downside is I'm never in a good mood and my family suffers. The downside is it's affecting my mental health. The downside is it's affecting my physical health. The downside is I have no energy to have hobby, or I don't even have energy to explore anything else. I'm working on vacation, even though I have it. So we never do an A/B comparison of what that looks like. I think if we did, we would find out a lot of times that the downside actually outweighs the pension and the vacation and all those things. Okay, so if that's true, get the shovel back out. If that's true, get the shovel back out. Start digging again. I'm starting to dig again at 46 years old because I know there's a time limit on how long I'm going to pastor. I know it's not set in stone, but I know I can't pastor into my 80s. I'm just not that type of guy. I'm probably not going to pastor into my 70s. So I need to start digging again because of a large portion of fleshing out my calling right now is pastoring. But at some point in time, it's not going to look like that. So if I just let pastor be that thing that keeps me from digging anymore, then I'm going to get to a certain point in my life and I'm going to be looking around going, what am I going to do now? But if I could say, okay, pastoring is part of the way this thing's fleshing out. So I need to keep the shovel ready and I need to keep digging. Even while I'm pastoring, I need to keep digging. So if you find yourself in a spot where you're like, I hate this job, but you feel stuck in it. A lot of people just put that shovel away. They don't entertain anything else. And then you get to the end of your career, you get a watch and you get to stand up at the end and go, this sucked, but I stuck it out. Get the shovel back out, reinvent yourself. I know that's the scariest thing anybody could say, it being middle-aged, it being in your 40s and having 20 years into a place. But if you look over history, the people that made an impact jumped out at some point in time, reinvented themselves, reinvented a company, reinvented the way they were going to live. They went out and got a degree at middle age. They went out and started a new business. They took a risk. I'm not saying you're not going to fail. You're probably going to fail at some point in time. But every time I've done that, it's ended up being way better than the failure was. And it's brought more richness to me and my family and the church and the businesses, all those things. And so it's going to be the scariest thing you've ever done, but the best thing you've ever done.
So a follow-up question to that is, how much should finances figure into a decision like that?
I think finances would correlate to responsibilities. I got a wife and 3 kids. So there was a season of my life where there's certain things I need to make sure happen. And I totally understand that. That doesn't mean I can't get the shovel out and start at least exploring. I'm not saying wake up the next day and quit your job and just tell your family, go figure it out. I have a little more flexibility now because my kids are grown and our expenses are reducing and we're making more money. And so now I have the flexibility of going, I don't have to do this. I can do this over here. I totally understand. If you got 3 toddlers in the house, there's a lot of commitment there. I would also say, if you got a mortgage and 2 car payments, I would be diligent in meeting my financial commitments, whatever they are now. I would never stand up in front of our church and say, everybody file bankruptcy and go follow your dreams. I don't think that's a good idea. So it would have to do with where financially you're responsible, how many commitments you currently have, all those things. Now, I will say this. Your life is not over at 45 years old or 50 years old. I think they say your most productive years are from like 40 to in your mid 60s. So if you're middle-aged looking at this and you feel trapped in a job for the last 20 years, you still got 15, 20 years of really high productivity. So it's not unfathomable to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to get the shovel back out. We're going to knock this debt out. We're going to knock these commitments out. And I'm going to start something else. I'm going to do something else and have that part of your purpose plan. Have that part of your calling plan. Hey, part of it is knocking this stuff out so I can go do what I want to do.
So another listener question, in a world that is constantly shifting, how will I know when to pivot toward my purpose?
Yeah. Let me say this. My purpose doesn't change with culture. That's a recipe to be schizophrenic as far as leadership is concerned. If my purpose is leading, maybe the way I have to lead generationally might change. I have to lead 20-year-olds differently than I do 50-year-olds. It's just inherent to the way culture changes. But the fact that I'm a leader doesn't change. I'm more refining the art of leadership to culture versus I'm not a leader anymore because the culture changed. So figuring out if you're a creative has nothing to do with culture. The way that thing manifests itself may change with culture. So if you were a realist painter and the impressionist era came along, you might have adapted a little bit, but you'd still be a painter. So in order to sell the painting and feed your family. So the way that fleshes itself out may change with culture, but your overarching calling may not change. So we do things totally different now in the church than we did 25 years ago. It's not even, none of it resembles what we did 25 years ago. I'm still a pastor. So I would say the key to it is, I don't know if your calling changes, but the way you flesh that out will have to change. The church is typically slow in doing that. They say the culture changes every 5 to 7 years. The church changes every, I don't know, 25 to 50, depending on what tribe you subscribe to. So I would say if you're trying to figure out how to pivot, it's not the calling on your life. It's how's that going to flesh out in the next 20 years. It's the idea that Apple went from making iPods to iPhones. They're still making personal media devices. And so they're still going to be a tech company. It's just, are they going to make iPods for the next 100 years? Or are they going to adjust that as the culture goes on?
So just speaking of culture, how do you stay positive and centered in what seems to be an increasingly insane world?
I think we tend to always over-centralize the culture we're currently in. And what I mean by saying that is, early Roman culture was just as crazy as it is now. They were stabbing leaders to death in early Roman culture, in early Greek. If you go back, we've been at each other as long as we've been humans. We've been devising new ways to hurt each other and to degrade culture. We've been doing that for a long time, and we're really good at it. So if at any point in time, which I will say the church has become maybe overly expressive about it, the church always likes to go, this is the worst culture ever. And that typically tells me that they don't read history very much when we say stuff like that. And it typically tells me that they're only talking about American culture. Because as far as a pastor is concerned, the gospel is going forward rampantly in some countries. In the country of Iran, in the country of China, the gospel is going forward extremely fast. Now, it may not be changing the leadership of those countries, but it is changing the culture. We typically get a very negative view of culture when we're evangelical. Our evangelical viewpoint is just honed in on America, and we say the American culture is going to hell, which I would agree. This may sound shocking, but I'm going to say it as a pastor. My calling is not to necessarily change the culture. My calling is to introduce individuals to Jesus. That's totally different. And when the church kind of gets those mixed up, when we become culture focused versus individual focused, then it looks like we're losing every day because we don't control culture. So when you go back and read the Gospels, or you go back and read Paul's epistles, you find out that they didn't necessarily get into a lot of overarching cultural commentary. Paul would write and say, you're a Christian, so don't do what the culture does. But he wouldn't say, go out and change the culture. He would say, now that you've separated yourself from whatever it was in that particular culture, he would say, now don't do that anymore. But there wasn't a lot of, we got to change the government here. Those conversations really didn't happen a whole lot. And so when the church starts focusing on government, when the church starts focusing on culture, we always put our head down and we get into woe is me. We're losing. But when we focus on individuals, it's a winning message. And so I would advise people to focus their impact and focus their mentality on where they're having an impact. It's the old story of everybody's positive when they're in the campaign, but then when they're actually in Congress, they realize, yeah, I was going to change the world 30 seconds ago, and then I actually got in office.
So who do you admire? Who do you follow? Who are some of your mentors?
I have a couple mentors that nobody knows. One gentleman's in his 80s, and he's traveled the world. He's taught at seminaries and Bible colleges, and he's impacted me in a huge ways. His name's Nat. And I'm a better public speaker because of him, a better preacher because of him. He reviews my sermons every week. There's another guy, local guy named Terry, that is also about 25 years older than me, that has been a missionary. He's traveled, has a doctorate degree. He's very well educated. He's started Bible schools. He's done a lot in the business world. And so those guys are the closest to me. And then a guy who was my pastor for 16 years, Don Webb, taught me how to be more gentle and patient and long-suffering with people, because that's typically not my MO initially. But he allowed me to grow up and taught me how to be patient in life and how to not fly off the handle. And so those three guys currently, as far as if I look across the broader spectrum of leaders, I'm fascinated by people who can think in a way that nobody else thinks. I'm just fascinated. I don't care. I don't necessarily care about their politics or but people who have shifted culture. And I know Elon Musk is like in vogue right now to talk about and all that stuff, but a genuine person, I don't know anything about his politics, really don't care, but shifted culture, was able to be a leader that changed the way we think about vehicles and changed the way we think about space travel. And you could go on and on about all those. I'm fascinated by those types of people, whatever their name is. I'm fascinated by people. Jesus happens to be one of those people that walked into a limited media and a limited print and limited by all those things, walked into earth and changed the way people think about things. I'm fascinated by those people.
What's next for you?
What's next for me? I am actually starting to prepare to be ready for the next season of my life. I think I'll do what I'm currently doing into my early 60s. And then I want to be set up and ready for that next thing. So I've talked about higher education and all those things, and middle-aged, going back to school, just making sure. I had a mentor tell me one time that God uses prepared people. And so it goes back into that digging thing. If you don't want to stay in the job that you feel stuck at, get prepared to do something else. If that means get out of debt, if that means change your mindset, if that means dig a little bit and find out what you're better at, something else that you're better at, prepare yourself. And then when that opportunity arises, you'll be able to just jump into it. And so that typically happens in a season where we're doing something else. And so right now I'm doing the full-time pastoring thing, leading a church. We're starting new churches. We have another business, a couple other businesses. I'm getting ready to make a trip to Kenya right now to do some teaching. And so in the middle of all that, I'm thinking 15 years down the road, can I get prepared for the next season of my life so it will be fruitful, so it will be fulfilling, so it will be impacting to others? I don't 100% know what that's going to be like, but I know I'm going to have to know more than I do currently. And so I'm trying to set myself up to do that. So yeah, get prepared.
God uses prepared people. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Chris, this has been an amazing discussion, and there's so much more that we could talk about, but man, this conversation has just been so rich with wisdom and experience. Thank you so much for taking time with me today. I definitely want to have you back on. We have so much more to discuss.
It's been fun. In
my mind, you have in many ways broken the mold for what a Protestant pastor looks like. So thank you for that. And
I hope. I hate mold.
I really look forward to continuing the conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Mark. It's been great.
Hey guys, thanks for watching and listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And check out some of these other clips from the podcast.